across the last 5 optimals for Daytona, the average starting position for a driver that made the optimal is 27.2. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the DK Garage. I'm Jeremy.
And I'm Joe.
Well, we're back to this format still. Someone's still a little bit in timeout for a little bit longer, but it seemed like last week went well, so we're gonna do it again. And I mean, we're at Daytona, where anything can happen. So I mean, we're ready for this race. I mean, it's the season finale. We've been talking about this for weeks now. Michigan was a little crazy. I guess first thing I'll ask is how did your Michigan results turn out?
It wasn't very pretty. We know a lot of people didn't do too well based on some of the favorites going in, people we were really high on that had the place differential, the great pass to value that we talked about last week. And Austin Dillon was primary and one of my favorite plays on the weekend. So I had a lot of him. And whenever him and Kozlowski got mixed up, it really hurt my chances of having a solid day. So I really didn't have much to look forward to for the rest of the day. I did have other lineups that did perform, but just not enough to make it a plus money day. How about yourself?
Yeah, it was unfortunately got my butt kicked again. But you know, a lot of the stuff that we said, I mean, I mean, Austin Dillon, I mean, he was obviously popular. He crushed most lineups. I was probably the heaviest on him. I mean, and dude, I mean, had the lead a couple different times, and he just didn't clear himself to maintain the lead. But I mean, he was going for it. He certainly looked. I mean, he was outperforming even I think what we expected. I didn't expect him to get up to the front that early and be contending for the lead. I was thinking, hoping the top 10, cracking top 5. That's kind of the range we're looking at. He was exceeding that. So when he went out, that hurt. I did shift some ownership over to Reddick. That was looking okay for a little bit too, but he wrecked out late. So just some of the pieces that I went with. It just they weren't terrible, but they were terrible enough that it didn't result in any profits this week. So, but I didn't go too heavy. I wasn't that thrilled with the Michigan slate. Um, I'm not too sure how thrilled I am about a super speedway. These things are, well, we'll get into it, but there's a very specific strategy that we follow, and at this point, most experienced DFS players follow. So it's just going to be about getting those right combos again. But for me personally, when it comes to super speedways, it's really all about the enjoyment of the actual race. It's a lottery ticket. You throw in 6 random drivers, salary doesn't matter, and you see which cars actually cross this finish line. And will there be more crossing the finish line or more on the wreckers? That's what super speedways ultimately come down to.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. I'm excited for that. And it being the final race of the regular season, too, there's a lot of things that go along with that we'll get into here shortly. But I want to get your opinion on a couple other situations around the Michigan race. William Byron, he was somebody that we looked at. He was highly priced based on his starting position, and he did really well. He was one of the most valued drivers on the slate, the most valued driver on the slate for his price. It was solid. He had a solid day. We anticipated him having a solid day. Were you surprised he had that great of a day?
I mean, ultimately, no. I didn't necessarily see it going in. As I was building lineups, I did put a few with William Byron, but we kind of talked about it. I actually ended up going a little bit more with Brad over Joey, which ended up being the right call. At times, it didn't look like the right call, but I was like, Brad has a little better history here, a little better history in the 550s. That's why I kind of ultimately went with him. I thought he would carry a little lower ownership. But I was pretty much stacking him with like Kyle Larson or Kyle Busch, and so I didn't end up with too much Byron, unfortunately. I also went fairly heavy with Alex Bowman, which very early on in the race it was looking great. He had decent. His track stats at Michigan weren't great, but the last time we were at the Auto Club, he dominated that race, and so I was like, I kind of rolled the dice. I thought he was in a good position. I heard some other people kind of thinking the same thing. So ultimately, that didn't play out. So just how I decided to construct my lineups, it was hard to put a lot of William Byron in there. Obviously, that was the wrong call, but that's just kind of how it played out for me for that slate.
Yeah, and his teammate Chase Elliott performed pretty well as well. He found himself in the optimal lineup, and if you check out our Patreon, we have the DraftKings slate review every week that we put out, and that optimal lineup it was William Byron, Chase Elliott, Kurt Busch, Christopher Bell, Matty D, and Chase Briscoe. So that was a little bit funky that Chase Briscoe there at the end made it really something that I didn't suspect. I didn't have any Chase Briscoe this weekend. I had one or two Matty D lineups just because I felt he's been strong. He can maintain with the arrow blocking and everything that we kind of talked about last week. He was able to find himself there. I wasn't anticipating it there, but Christopher Bell, somebody we were really high on, he
Right.
found himself there in the mix. But Kurt Busch, man, him and that team have found some really good speed and have been putting together really strong performances right at the right time.
Yeah, the 550 package here lately has been pretty stout for old Kurt Busch. That was surprising. I mean, it was surprising to see two guys. I mean, well, I guess technically three if you count Chase. I'm not surprised Chase made the optimal because uh, I kind of thought about I think I had a few lineups built around him as kind of like that main dominator, which allowed me to then go get William Byron, Brad Keselowski, things like that. But the fact that both Matty D and Kurt Busch, starting essentially what the top six, made the optimals, it didn't. That's not really how history projected a lot of these, for the optimals. Um, so it was surprising that they both made it. I could see one, but both. That just shows you kind of how wacky the race was. I don't think I heard anybody suggesting to play Kurt Busch or Matty D last week, just based on where they were starting from and what they were likely to do, and then they end up in the optimal. I mean, it just goes to show you how fun this sport can be, how frustrating this sport can be, all at the same time. But that's one of the reasons why I'm in it. I think that's one of the reasons why you're in it too.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun, and this is kind of going through this process that we're going through, looking at the previous race data history, the optimal lineups. We're going to really have emphasis on the optimal lineups this week as we're getting into super speedway action. We got a little taste. It almost had a vibe last week of super speedway racing, a hint of it. So if you thought there was chaos that ensued during that race and that we got some cautions at the end to change things up, it's going to be wild this weekend headed into Daytona. We've talked about it before on a couple of our other episodes how this kind of racing is so much fun to watch, especially in the environment we're going into this weekend where it's the final race of the regular season. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to play into that. The optimal lineups are one of them. But before we get there, is there anything else that at Michigan that happened that you wanted to touch on, or are you kind of
Well,
wanting to
well,
jump into this week's Super Speedway stuff?
well. I wanted to ask you kind of. Well, I guess I'll ask you kind of point blank. Did you vote on Jeff Gluck's poll after the race?
I did.
Did you vote yes or no? Which, before you answer, I don't like the yes or nos. Some races, I think you can do a hard yes, hard no. I really think there should be a yes, but, or a no, but, like a little caveat. I feel like that's kind of a little bit more fair. But anyway, what did you vote for this race? A yes or a no? Was it a good
I
race?
voted I voted no. I just thought that it could have been more fun. There wasn't a lot of passing throughout the race. To me, knowing how they've raced in the past and what is available or has been available to them in previous packages and things along those lines, this race was to me wasn't as good as it could have been. But again, I can completely see from a novice fan's perspective or anybody's perspective in all honesty that hey, it produced a decent show, and there were a lot of elements to it that were fun to watch. But to me, once Austin Dillon went out and the impact on that race for the playoff situation pretty much was null and void after he got taken out. I really didn't think there was a lot left to watch that really mattered in my opinion. So it was an all right race. It's one of those that falls into and maybe it shouldn't have been a hard no, but it was okay. How about yourself?
Uh,
What were your final thoughts on it?
I went no as well. Had there be, like I said, that little caveat where you could say, it was an all right race. It wasn't the worst. But I had to say, if it's a hard 50-50 like that, I had to go no because I thought it just, you couldn't pass the leader. It was very, very hard. We only saw a couple times where a driver had the opportunity to pass other than the restarts. The restarts on this package, this track, I mean, it was crazy. It's wild. They're going 4 or 5 wide at times. They're making crazy moves. But once they get going, it's all about the aero. There's some decent racing kind of back in the pack a little bit. But up front, once you had the lead, unless you just kind of had way worse tires or you just happened to mess up because you had a lift or something like that, you weren't getting past. It was easy to stay out in front. And it just felt a little gimmicky. It was like a fake super speedway race. And I think there's probably a lot of, like you said, newer novice fans who on the screen it looks exciting. And it may even have been looked exciting at the track. But I think when you kind of break down what was really going on, um, it it was a so-so race. So that's why I kind of ended up with the no. It's just like I can't really say that was a good race. Um, I thought the Indy road course was a much better race, even with the stupid ending. I thought that was just overall was more entertaining than what Michigan was.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree with you. We hadn't even really talked about that topic, but it's interesting to get your perspective because at the end of the day, we're all fans of the sport. We all have our own opinions, and that's the beautiful thing about this is we can come on here and voice them. And if you agree, awesome. If you don't, that's great for you as well. Everybody has their own view of what they expect week to week, and I know what I'm expecting headed into Daytona, and that's going to be pure chaos.
Well, speaking of Daytona, I was going to kind of shift gears. I think you know, Ryan Blaney won. If you happen to miss the race, he won Michigan. He got his second win of the year, first time of his career. That actually helps him out. That improves his chances of making that next round or deeper into the playoffs. So obviously good for the 12 team. Um, some other drivers who didn't do so hot. I think Larson did extend his points lead just a little bit over Hamlin. So unless Hamlin kind of finishes top three and Larson wrecks out, Larson should end up the regular season championship. But there's wiggle room there. But the thing I wanted to ask you, shifting gears into Daytona, that is different than previous super speedway races, is technically this is going to be, to the best of my knowledge, the first time we will be running this aero and engine package on a super speedway. They had knocked it down from 550 to 510 earlier this year, and now they're knocking off another 60. So now we're down to 450 horsepower. I'm pretty sure there are, Toyota Corollas out on the street that have more horsepower than that. So I don't know what NASCAR is doing, but that's what they're doing. They're changing the aero, the little bit of the splitter, or not splitter, but the spoiler. That's obviously important. I don't know how much it's really going to affect us from a DK perspective, but what are your thoughts of this aero or this package change like this? Do you think it's going to produce better racing?
I hope so, but I really don't see how less horsepower, less speed is going to equal better racing. And we're all looking for the action-packed super speedways that we're accustomed to seeing. And if we're getting a little bit less horsepower, we're going to have less speeds. It's going to be harder for those lot. You're really going to have, I think, way closer pack racing to produce a good event for us. So I'm interested to see how it actually looks on display. What are your thoughts about it?
Well, I mean, I've heard some different, I guess, opinions from different drivers and whatnot. I kind of, based on what I'm kind of understanding now, it sounds like it's going to bunch, it more than likely is going to bunch the field up a little bit tighter, which it's already super tight. And with less horsepower, I think the runs are going to become even more important. You're way less likely to lift. I mean, they're using 100 less horsepower than they were like last year, I believe, on this, the style track. So I think, you know, there's going to be less people lifting, and there's going to be more blocking and more aggressive blocking, which I think is only going to lead to more wrecks. So I think, part of it is they don't want these cars flying through the air. They're still, I'm sure, learning things from that crazy Ryan Newman wreck, and then obviously the Talladega wreck with Joey Logano this year,
Joey
where
Logano.
he flipped up on his roof. Um, could obviously was thankfully everything worked out okay there, but that could have obviously been bad. So I know they're trying to do things to keep things on the car or on the ground, um, and still produce a good show. But I mean, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know. But it seems like you're just asking these guys to stay full throttle the whole time, centimeters now off of one another, and blocking like crazy. So I don't know. I think this race could potentially get pretty chaotic and maybe really ugly by the end of it.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is the 400-mile event rather than the 500 that we get it to open the season. So there's a little bit less laps that are involved at 160 laps this time around. It's a 2.5-mile track. It's going to be exciting, like as always. So I guess we can start talking a little bit about strategy because whenever we're looking at the performance points, there's 112 of them available this week, but it's not really going to factor into it. There's so many fastest laps to go around because of the pack racing environment that they're in. Those are going to get dispersed across the board the entire day. So it's going to be very difficult for anybody to really stack up performance points because they'll be changing the lead at the front of the pack all day long as well. So a lot of factors that go into strategy this week. I know a lot of people, especially experienced DFS players, you'll hear everywhere you go this week, stack the back.
Yep, yep, and don't be afraid to leave a lot of salary on the board. We'll get into it when we kind of review some of the optimals, but you leaving 5, 10 grand or more on the board is more than likely going to be what's going to be optimal. If you want to max it out, obviously go for it. It can be pretty hard to want to submit an entry with, you know, literally like enough money to play like a Kyle Busch or a Logano or something like that on a normal week. I mean, it doesn't seem right. But that's just the trends of these types of tracks. It's going to be fun, but I think realistically, I mean, I know you like to look at your lineups throughout the race. I doubt that I open up DraftKings at all once everything is locked because it really doesn't matter. And I think what makes this race a little bit more interesting than maybe some other super speedways is the fact that it's the cutoff race. There is one spot open for a driver to get in who does not have a win. There may be a driver who gets on points, likely Tyler Reddick if that's the case, but possibly Austin Dillon. And then the only other thing that's really going on is the regular season championship between Larson and Hamlin, and then any other playoff driver who just wants to try to pad their stats a little bit and get that win, because obviously every driver wants to win, but that also comes with 5 playoff points. So there's lots of different strategies that I think is going to be at play, um, more so than other times at super speedways. I think it could be, we'll see, but I think this could be a fairly calm race until the third stage. That's when I think things will start to get, the intensity will go up. That's when these guys are going to start making a little bit more aggressive moves. I think there'll be a few guys. I think maybe Dylan is one that maybe tries to get up front, or Reddick. They may be the guys that try to stay up front for those stage points. But I don't think hardly anybody's going to be stage point racing in this race. For most drivers, it doesn't matter. For basically for about 4 drivers, stage points matter in this race. So, what about you? What are you thinking, kind of strategy wise, from the team's perspective?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. There's really only a handful of drivers that have anything at stake at this point. Um, and the ones that do are going to be fighting tooth and nail for this opportunity. You've got guys like Matty D, Ross Chastain, just to name a couple drivers that literally are fantastic at these kind of courses or at these type of super speedway events that this is their final opportunity to stamp their name into the playoff mix. Austin Dillon, Tyler Reddick, we've talked about them back and forth week in and week out now, fighting for that final spot, but it won't matter if they don't win this race. If someone else that is below them steps up and gets the job done, they're out no matter what after this. So there's a lot at stake for these guys that are uh, there at that threshold and then below it trying to find an opportunity to extend their season, because after Saturday night, it doesn't matter if playoff point scenario if you didn't do your job for the first portion of this season. So it's going to be interesting to see who brings it, and there's going to be chaos that ensues. I think that third and final stage, we could see the big one happen a little bit later on than normal, just because people are really wanting to try to make it to the end, but you never know when something's going to go south in this type of event, because they are racing so close together and so fast. It's always, always one of the most fun races for any fans to watch, because you just never know what's going to happen, and then the endings are always wild. And I just always remember the Darrell Waltrip days of cautions breed cautions, and at super speedway races in particular, you'll see it happen more often than not.
Yeah, and a lot of times the guys, the ultimate race winner might have a fairly clean car, but there's a high probability that at least one driver who finishes in the top 5 will have a pretty busted up car. That's just how these things go. So it could get really ugly. Like I was saying earlier, I think will we see more cars cross the finish line or end up on the hook? And
Checkers or wreckers, baby.
and I think this one is for sure one of those where there'll probably be more cars on the hook than that finish this race. I was just going to think, there's one super speedway race after this one. Obviously, all the teams will want to win that one too, but this is the last year of the car. So I would think, especially for all these drivers who are trying to get into the playoffs, this is their best car. They do not care if they wreck it. They are going for it. So I think it could get pretty ugly, or super speedway terms could be pretty normal. Just wreck after wreck, but we'll see. Now, normally about this time is when we kind of start talking about the drivers and really get into track data, track history, and things like that. I think, talk about a couple briefly, just so you can kind of have an idea, okay, which drivers kind of are strong here, but I don't think that matters that much. I think once we kind of talk about this, we'll kind of get into what the some of the previous optimals tell us, because I think that's how you're really going to construct your lineup. And then you're kind of playing, okay, we're all going to be on the same strategy, but how can we honestly have different lineups? How can we get off on some of the chalk ownership, or how can we have some of this chalk ownership, but then have some other drivers who also perform well that maybe don't look as good to other people? Obviously, you don't know what everyone's going to enter, but that's kind of how you have to build the lineups. But I think, and if you are one of those uh, people who really want to see the track data, I did put together a lot of stats for track history here. I just don't think that's super relevant. But if you do want to see that, that will be on our Patreon. That's our garage thoughts. I got we pulled the last 30 super speedway races, last 15, and then just the last 4 at Daytona. So you'll have a good little mixture of all time, or not all time, but extended history and then short history. And when you get into it, I think realistically, there's probably two to three drivers who really kind of stand out at super speedways. I think most well known, I think, for super speedway racing would probably be Denny Hamlin, especially when it comes to Daytona. But if you look over the last 30 races, he has 5 wins. So that's going to be Talladega and Daytona, of course. But the thing that really impresses me the most about Hamlin is over 30 races, his average finish is 12th. It's at least 4 spots better than the next guy. He's got 15 top fives. So if there is one guy where you kind of break the strategy of super speed races, it's probably going to be to play Hamlin, which I expect him to be highly owned. Do you have any thoughts about Hamlin before I kind of move on?
I think you're spot on. I think that you look at that and his history, he could be that guy that's the outlier. There's other drivers that have pretty strong performances like Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski. They've got a lot of wins in super speedway on super speedway tracks and have decent performance, but not like Brad's top fives are half of what Denny Hamlin is there with those 15.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to take note of because they've all three of those drivers we just mentioned are three of the most experienced in this setting. And you can even throw Martin Truex Jr. in the mix. He's not a bad super speedway racer. He just doesn't have the wins that these guys do. So the chaos at the end is really what people remember. We can see guys like Ryan Newman that have had great success at super speedways over the years and just haven't got the wins or the final results that you would expect because of last lap accidents and things of that nature. It's just so chaotic that it's really the data is difficult to want to dive too deep into, like you alluded to. But in the garage thoughts that you put together, one of the things that I went straight to was the optimals, the optimal lineups. I think doing research on that is going to be just as paramount as data this week, if not more so, because you can see how previous lineup constructions have been done in years past, and you can see, hey, don't worry about leaving salary on the table this week. It by no stretch of the imagination is leaving a couple grand on the table. Like, it's common practice at this point for this type of event.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you look at there was, let's see, essentially $4,000 left on the salary for the most recent Daytona 500, and it was, I mean, construction wise, it was pretty similar, but it had a little bit of uniqueness. But you go down a little bit more, 5,000 for the previous Daytona race, another 4,000 salary. So, and then you put this one together. Is that 2019 Daytona race number 2? Is that right? $33,000 for the salary.
Yeah, that was the rain shortened event that Justin Haley won. So
Ah, okay,
we
that
had
makes more
Justin
sense.
Haley. Yeah, Justin Haley started 34th, finished first, and then you didn't have anyone like in the teens. It was 23rd place was the starting position for Ty Dillon. He ended up finishing fourth. All these guys performed really well. Go take a look at the garage thoughts, the Daytona Optimals, and go look at the 2019 Daytona race because it's wild. $33,000 was the total to get you 372 points. That's just wild.
Well,
$5,500 was the average salary of the driver that year.
6,400 was the most expensive. That was Matty D. Like, yeah, I forgot that that was the range shortened. So it does make a little bit more sense. Obviously, it's that probably wouldn't have played out that way had it gone the full distance. But hey, that could happen again. I mean, it's Florida. Weather can get crazy. I think lightning played a big part in that one too. So it just goes to show you, uh, no matter what. I mean, even if you go one more race, I mean, I think the most expensive total salary is like 46,300. So you will be leaving salary on the board. Um, the average across the last 5 optimals for Daytona, the average starting position for a driver that made the optimal is 27.2. 27.2. The average finish of all the drivers in the last 5 Daytona races is 5.7. So it is almost strictly a PD race here. Um, Obviously, the performance points will help add up a little bit, but that's not what we're targeting because these numbers just show it. I mean, you start to break it down. 5 races, 2 drivers started in the top 10 made the optimal. 2 drivers from 11 to 20th made the optimal. That's 4 drivers in the top 20 over the last 4 races. Uh, that just doesn't happen at most tracks, and that's one of the things that makes super speedway racing fun. But then we start to go down a little further down the list. 21 through 30th, 14 drivers came from that grid position, and then 12 came from 31st to last. That's kind of how these things really break down. It's you may pull one driver from the top 10, maybe. I think this week it'd probably be maybe Denny Hamlin if you're going to do that. You may pull one from the mid-teens, but realistically, it's probably 23rd on back is probably what you're looking at, somewhere around in there.
Yeah, Joey Logano is starting at the top of the salary board at 10,600, and he's starting 22nd. He kind of tempts you to be able to do that, but he's got to get a lot more. He's got to have a lot better finish than a 29th Ross Chastain or a 24th Ryan Preece, and it's one of those situations where if you're building a lot of lineups, absolutely you can you'll want some Joey Logano exposure because there's going to be drivers even starting in the back that are going to crash out, and if you don't have the right combination, you're not going to have a great day because you never know who's going to be sitting around at the end. We just know that stack the back is their approach, and we're just going to keep our fingers crossed that we have the right combinations because this weekend it's not going to matter until the final checker flag's waved.
Okay, so regardless of salary, let's just kind of play this out a little bit. Regardless of salary, let's say you have enough cheap guys, and you probably would, you can easily fit Logano in there, or the next guy on the list, which is Austin Dillon. We kind of talked about him already. If you have your 5 roster spots filled and you got to have one more driver, and it's coming down between Joey Logano or Austin Dillon, who are you taking? Just in that,
Austin Dillon, he
yeah.
yeah, Austin Dillon, he's got too much at stake this weekend. It might mean he ends up in a wreck because he's given it all his all. That might be the downside, but I think he's a great super speedway racer. He's won here at Daytona before. I would look to him with his back against the wall to be able to get something done. But yeah, I think he just offers more upside too. Start with the 5 spot positions behind Joey Logano on the starting grid. I think it equals a better play in my opinion.
Okay, but also factoring in NASCAR. Who do you think is more likely to finish this race between the two? Because ultimately, that's what it kind of comes down to. Because I can give you some stats real quick between the two. Logano's got a clear advantage for driver rating compared to Dylan, but they both have one win. Logano's got one more top five. He's got four versus three. Dylan's got more top tens. He's got two more. He's got two more top 15s, and he's got three more top 20s. His average finish is also lower too. So you get a better driver rating and probably better driver overall, better, a little bit better equipment, or you got a guy with slightly better numbers. Um, who do you see more likely to finish this race? Because, like I said, that's ultimately what it matters.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a clear vision of
It's a tough one.
how that's going to play out, but I think Austin Dillon's he has no choice if he wants to make the playoffs, but to keep that car clean. It's going to be a challenge. We've seen him in bad spots before, especially at super speedways, just get torn up or make a stupid move or not be aggressive enough at some point. So there's so much at stake. We could sit here and talk about each driver in their situation, but it really doesn't matter until because you can't control whenever things are going south, whenever they're bunched up as fast as they're going, however fast that is this weekend. But it's going to be interesting to see who can keep it clean. We know Joey Logano is a just really solid super speedway racer. He knows how to keep it clean, but at the same time, we've seen him on his roof, so it's hard to know which way it's gonna play out this weekend.
I mean, I'm a little disappointed in you right now because I told you to bring your crystal ball for this podcast because I was going to be throwing you questions like this. It would have made it a lot easier than just saying I don't know because I certainly don't know either. I mean, this is what makes this type of racing fun. I think based on kind of what we've seen, I think I would imagine Dylan is going to be cautiously aggressive. I think he knows he's got to have a good finish and probably is going to have to win. Whereas I think Logano, he's just going for the win and he's probably a little bit more likely to wreck out. So I think I would also give the nod to Dylan in that regard. Um, but it's tough. It really is because you can make a good case for both. So obviously, I was a little surprised when Dylan was second most expensive. I don't know if I've ever seen him the second most expensive driver on a slate before. Um, but there's a reason for it. I mean, he is pretty solid here. I mean, he does have a win at this track in the 400 race, so he knows how to get it done in the heat. That's the other thing compared to February. It's going to be hotter there. The track's not going to have quite as much grip, and with less horsepower, these cars are going to be kind of sliding around. I mean, it's going to be fun. Um, Let me get back to the slate real quick.
Yeah, because
If,
it's going to
if
be interesting.
are you think? I mean, sorry to kind of cut you off, but if we kind of just skim the next three, Brad, Kozlowski, Kevin Harvick, Alex Bowman, are you interested in them because they fall in that line where you saw one to two drivers come from that starting grid and make the optimal, so it can happen. Is there anyone in that price range that you might go with?
It's going to be tough, but with that with that price tag, they're going to have really better than top 10 performances to make it worth value. Obviously, it's going to be a challenge with as many accidents as we're expecting to see for them not to get caught up in those. But Brad Keselowski has the most super speedway wins of any active driver right now with 7. So he's somebody that could come in and fly under the radar, keep it clean, and end up winning this thing. And he would reach value at that point. But it's going to be challenging because the path of value is so difficult. But if I were to pick one, I would probably pick him out of those three that you just mentioned. Alex Bowman has a little bit easier path if he has a strong performance starting 15th. I just Kevin Harvick right now, to me, I don't really want to have much exposure to him. There's not really much interest, but I would lean Brad Keselowski's way more so than the other drivers. How about yourself?
But see, I kind of thought you might say something like that. And the only reason I'm kind of pointing these out is obviously every point you made about Brad is obviously spot on. Um, I think Alex Bowman, like you said, his path to value is easier, and I think I'll probably fit a couple lineups with Bowman in this week. I think he's kind of a good sneaky play there. But this actually did surprise me. When I look at the last 15 Daytona races, Harvick has the fifth best overall driver rating. Um, it's kind of surprising. He's got five top fives. He doesn't have a win. His average finish is 19.3, so it's certainly pretty ugly there. But I think if he's one of those guys, if you're gonna play the strategy of not just selling out and going all guys in your lineup starting 20th or worse, that's kind of obviously how the optimals lead you to. But if you're gonna say, hey, no, there's gonna be one coming from the top 10 or the top 15 at least. I think ownership wise, I think Harvick is probably likely to be the lower owned of those three. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I think so. I
And
think he would probably.
and I guess we should kind of clarify. I'm kind of talking more kind of tournaments here. I'm not talking kind of cash plays. So this would kind of be GPPs. I mean, I think that that probably still would apply to um, cash type plays as well. I doubt he would be the higher of those three drivers in ownership, but I don't think either of those guys would be highly owned in cash if I were, if I was guessing from this point of view. But if GPPs, if you're trying to really take a good swing at the top prizes and you're going to pick one of those three, I think Harvick is likely to be the lowest owned.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's going to be difficult to find anybody in that price range that's going to want to have too much exposure that way. I think a lot of, like we've talked about, stack the backs approach. So a lot of the winning lineups will probably have a good mix of the guys lower down on the salary board with these kind of the right value plays that end up panning out sprinkled in that will make them the difference makers.
So we'll put out our impact score so you can kind of, and that'll really kind of paint the picture um, for the race day rundown that we'll put out, you know, on race day. So you'll get a good idea. We're not going to talk about too many of these drivers. I think Hamlin is certainly one we've already mentioned. When we look at just the last, let me get to it real quick, just the last five Daytona races, he's made four optimal lineups, which is insane. There's a couple guys who or drivers who's made two. Elliott's made two, McDowell's made two, Ross Chastain and Corey LaJoie have both made two of those five optimals. It's pretty impressive, but Hamilton, and now I think that includes, a couple of his Daytona 500 wins, of course. But he has been really solid here lately. He wants to get that win. I'd probably love to get that win going. I mean, think about this scenario. This is if you're Hamlin's team, you're a Hamlin fan or whatever. This is sort of the dream scenario. You know, uh, I don't know about winning the stages. If you can do that, great. But that's who knows. But if you can win the race, that's five extra playoff points. And if you do well enough, or Larson does wrecks out, and you are able to capture the regular season championship, you just banked 20 playoff points in one race, potentially 22 if he does really well in the stages. That's sort of the dream scenario, I think, for that 11 team this week. I think their driver is certainly capable of doing that. And I think he's, again, if you're going to pull a driver from those top guys, starting position wise, he's going to be the highest owned.
Yeah, and you look at, if we do jump into the stats a little bit further, like the last six super speedway races, he's got five top fives. So he can get it done in this in this type of racing style, in this environment. He knows how to play it right to be there at the end to have a shot at it. He's got an average finish of seventh. That's insane.
He's at
Whenever you're looking at the last
7.7.
six super, yeah, last six super speedway races, that's pretty legit because he's been able to keep it clean and be there at the end. So I'm expecting him to want to be there and trying to be there at the end for that regular season championship. So I would imagine he has more at stake than a lot of these other drivers to try to get that advantage on Kyle Larson, who's been pretty dominant as of late.
Without looking too closely at it, do you know who has the second best average finish over the last 6 Superspeedway races? I
I'm
could
not
see
a
you
hundred.
glancing. I could see you glancing.
I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure on that one. Who is it?
Kevin Harvick, 10.5 with 3 top 5s. I don't really like
Pretty
playing Kevin
solid.
Harvick at super speedways, but I mean, it's again, if you're just looking to, if you're gonna have all the chalk in the back, you're gonna need at least one driver that's gonna be lower owned just to keep you a little, hopefully, different enough to get some of that higher end money.
I could
I
tell you who's fourth in the last six, though. That's going to be Chris Busher. He was in the DK Insights portion of what I threw together for our race guide this week. So I do remember that. Chris Busher is going to be somebody that's in the mix with where he's going to be starting. There's a lot of those guys. I think that's in that middle tier that offer a lot of great potential for value this week.
Okay, so there's not too many more drivers that I want to get into per se because again the stats don't matter too much. We've kind of hit some of the main guys. What I wanted to kind of end with is it's kind of factors in for DraftKings, but it's also just for the regular season. I've already mentioned we got one spot open to make the playoffs. That's it. There's one spot. Either you're getting in on points if you're Reddick or Dillon, or you're winning your way in. So who is your pick, or who's your main pick, and maybe your backup pick as far as a driver to get into the playoffs? Who would you go with? Now that may be a little different than your ultimate race pick. Maybe you're going to go with Hamlin. I don't know. But if we're talking just drivers who are not in the playoffs, who are likely to make it, who would you lean towards?
Well, likely to make it if the situation that you just kind of laid out, say Denny Hamlin wins or somebody along those lines that's already got the win, then I think Tyler Reddick gets in because of the point situation if he has a decent day. But I'm not, for the fun of it, I really think I would lean on going. Man, there's two drivers that I really want to pick, and the first one that comes to mind that I think that has been doing a lot better as of late has some decent momentum, and this would just be a career highlight like you could never dream of is be Matty D. I think that would be just awesome to see happen. It'd be great for him and his career to be able to win at Daytona, to get that final spot, to go into the playoffs, and then compete. If they've been strong, if they could put together a race at Daytona to get into the playoffs and then continue to build upon what they've been able to do the last few weeks, that would be huge. But I'm not sure that that actually happens. I would love to see it happen for him and that team. But man, that would be a story, wouldn't it?
It really would. I mean, I even got my Matty D hat on right now. Uh, I mean, he came really close at Talladega. He just either him or his spotter or combo of the both. They made the mistake and actually allowed Brad to win that race. So he's been close. He's had times where he's really looked good. I would say he would be kind of one of the two.
And even this week, he's starting ninth,
Yeah.
but he's $6,700. So he could be one of those guys that's that top 10 that, if you will, that
Oh yeah.
starts there, gets a even if he gets 10th place, man, that he's losing a position, but he almost is 5x value right there. So he's somebody that's starting in the top 10 that you could easily look to be a little bit different this week.
And I plan on playing him in some lineups and building him with a bunch of those back guys for that very reason. So he's going to be one of the guys that I legitimately think that he can do it, not just because it'd be awesome to see as a fan of both of his and of the sport. I think it'd be awesome for the sport. He's obviously not fan favorite like Chase Elliott's fan favorite, but I think a lot of NASCAR fans they don't have much negative things to say about Matty D. I think most of them. I think he's probably favorable in most uh, different fan bases. You know, you couldn't say the same thing about like Kyle Busch. You know, if you're a Kyle Busch fan, you're a Kyle Busch fan. But most other fan bases, they don't like him. I don't really feel like Matty D kind of fits that. So I think that would be really cool for the sport. I think when you break down the numbers, and I think I even picked. I'm pretty sure I picked him in the my preseason picks. But the guy that should be the one to advance into the playoffs, if he's able to win, he has to win. That should be Bubba Wallace. Statistically, when you just kind of compare him to those drivers who aren't I mean, even if you compare him to other drivers, he's got the eighth best driver rating, even against guys like Hamlin and Logano, things like that. But he's got the best driver rating out of anybody who's not currently locked into the playoffs, better than Austin Dillon. And that was for the most part, most of the data is going to be coming from the 43 car, and 23 car should be faster. We saw, I think it was, I don't, I don't remember
Daytona
exactly. I don't
Speedway.
remember the Daytona doing so well, but I think I remember Talladega. He had times where he was up there. He even led some laps at Talladega. Um, but I am forgetting a little bit how Daytona went. But hey, that was the first race of their, you know, them as an organization. So I'll give them a pass for that one. So Bubba Wallace is the guy that I think should advance. Um, could be Dylan, but for some reason, man, and I don't plan on playing a lot of them because I don't really like his starting position. I don't like how aggressive he is. But the old gut kind of tells me Ricky Stenhouse. I don't know why, but we've seen him win at super speedways before. These are his types of races, and just wouldn't that just be the little cherry on top for the greatest season ever? We see Ricky Stenhouse backdoor his way into the playoffs. Uh, that's kind of what I feel. I don't want that to happen necessarily. Nothing against him, but that's not what I'd love to see. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. Where are you kind of landing on Ricky this week?
Man, Ricky's viable, man. He's always in the conversation when it comes to super speedway racing. He finds a way to get it done if he's not wrecking. But it's going to be fun. I think he could find himself in the mix. We've seen him there multiple times. He's won at super speedway tracks before. I think there's a handful of guys like him that are going to be talked about, but I don't know how talked about they're going to be. I think Chris Buescher is somebody $5,200 starting 13th. He falls in that same kind of category where they know how to race these kind of tracks, even with that starting position being top 15, just like Ricky Stenhouse starting 12th. Those two guys are very comparable. They both can get the job done. Like I said, Chris Buescher's fourth whenever it comes to average finishing position in the last six races at super speedways. He can get the job done. So I think him and Stenhouse are very comparable this week and could go a little bit under owned because of their starting positions.
It'll be fun to see how this all plays out. Um, I think, from this side of it, that's about all I have. There's really not a ton more to say. I mean, it really just comes down to the strategy, getting the combos that you're happy with, and just enjoy this race. Expect or be prepared to lose and hope to win because that's essentially what these teams are doing. The thing about super speedways is it really levels out the playing field for most of these teams. There's not a ton of teams that have a huge advantage with the car setups. I mean, we've seen it before where I know he didn't race his way up there, but Justin Haley, he was in enough position to win. Now that was a little funky, but we've seen other guys. That's just where a lot of drivers get sometimes their first cup win and only cup win comes on super speedways. Up until recently, Eric Almirola had only won on super speedways. So this and this is why NASCAR put it at the end of the regular season, is creating as much drama as possible. I'm sure they're loving the fact that there's at least one spot still open for someone to get in, because we haven't had that many winners yet. So it's just like I said. I mean, play the strategy, um, because this can nobody really knows. You really have just as much odds this week of throwing one lineup in the 150 max and beating guys putting 150 in. It really is a roll of the dice. There's not a whole lot that you can do to get an edge on it unless you have that crystal ball that you didn't bring
Yeah, no, I don't
tonight.
have that at my disposal. I wish I did, but it'd be fun to kind of look into that and be able to build a lineup that's based around Kaz Gralla, Justin Haley, and who knows whoever else. But it's going to be fun, man. It's going to be exciting. It's one of my favorite styles of racing because you really don't know what to expect. All you really know to expect is chaos, and there's going to be cautions. We just don't know when those are going to fall, who's going to be involved, and all the other things that are implied there. But yeah, it's the final regular season race, so there's a lot of impacts that are going to be, or that there's a lot of things that are going to be impacted by this race, and the final playoff positions are going to be determined by how the outcome of this race is ultimately done.
One thing to note, probably should have said this at the beginning, so hopefully y'all are still tuning in. This race is on Saturday night. So make sure you are prepared for that. It's not on Sunday. If you're planning on submitting your lineups on Sunday morning, the race will be over. So the Xfinity race is on Friday night. Watch it. That will be fun. I don't think it'll really tell us anything for the race, but it's going to be a fun, exciting race. They got their own good battles going on in that series. And obviously, be looking for the race day rundown to come out on Saturday. Hopefully, give you a little bit better, clear picture of where we're at. Most of the guys starting up front are going to be very low numbers, and most of the guys starting in the back are going to be very high numbers. But at least you'll get a little of an idea of where we're kind of seeing this thing going towards.
Absolutely. And if you get an opportunity, make sure you check out the Garage Thoughts. That link is below in our Patreon. So go check that out. It gives you a lot more insight into the data if you want to dive into that. And then also those optimal lineups are there. So go take advantage of and do a little homework there to make sure that you're building the lineups the way that they've been successful in the past. We're going to put an abbreviated version of our race guide. We're not going to do projections this week because it's really pointless, in our opinion, to provide projections. It's going to be chaos. So we'll make sure we include our DK impact score so you have an idea of where we're really feeling that we'll have our exposure this week. So make sure you check out the race guide too if you want to have insight there. We'll have some other information as in regards to a couple of our core lineup builds as well on our player pool, so you can go check that out. But yeah, man, it's going to be exciting. I'm excited to get the race day rundown video out so people can get those impact scores there too, and have a couple more thoughts of ours on how we're approaching this. And outside of that, I don't know if I've got anything more to add. How about you, man?
I'm good, man. Let's get this thing rolling. It's a great race, man. I love this race, but it is the unknowns can be very nerve wracking when you're building lineups. So, but yeah, let's just get to it, man.
All right. Well, without further ado, I'm Joe. He's Jeremy, and we'll see you next time.